Okay, we've got three folks who want to talk about the Bethel Island issue. Mr. Baranis, I'm sorry, I can't read the printing on that, but Berzini, I'm sorry. The Bethel Island Municipal District. The microphone's right up there if you'd be good enough to use the podium.
My name is Anthony Berzinas. I'm currently serve as the Vice President on the Bethel Island Municipal Improvement District Board. And I apologize, I'm not as prepared as some of my cohorts here from Bethel Island. But I see some real conflicts in this, and I take exception to the gentleman's definition that Bethel Island isn't worthy of being defined as a community, whether it be legacy or otherwise preserving. It's one of the longest standing communities in the Delta. It has the most varied history throughout the entire Delta. It represents not only the historical agricultural development and reclamation of the 1800s, it also has the unique singular example of post-World War II development for recreational uses of the Delta, which are deteriorating but still able to be preserved. I encourage that gentleman and anybody else to come on down, and I'll take them for a tour around the top of that levee and show them all of the homes that presently are excluded from this legacy community boundary. I find it very unique that this boundary has been set up to protect a vacant development and doesn't protect any other residential inhabitants on the island. I don't understand that, but I hope that will be resolved by further looking at it. I think the report also has some other conflicts within it, and you're talking about shared costs. Well, you're asking for the entire state of California to share costs for water diversions for our fellow citizens in Southern California, but yet you're not willing to bring forward to share the cost of protecting those water quality issues across the state. I think that's inherently unfair. If we're going to share the cost to try to solve water delivery problems in Southern California, we darn sure ought to be able to share the cost to preserve the area that water is being drawn from. And my last comment, and I'm going to turn it over to my cohorts because they are a little bit more prepared than I am on this. The water flow issue and the plumbing issue within your report, if you read through your report, you show if the levees failed, you'd have this salinity incursion into the delta, et cetera, et cetera. But nowhere in there do you make the correlation. If you actually put in the water diversion that you're talking about approving here, you're going to reduce the water flow pressure that will be equal to or maybe greater than, in some cases, the levee water flow situation. Those diversions upstream will destroy agriculture down the 160 corridor, down the Highway 4 corridor, everywhere, because the salinity pressure backing up that those farmers use for their riparian water rights will be worthless. And nowhere in there do I see that reflected, except for the fact you identify that if you lost this water flow or the pressures were changed, you'd get salinity. But if you divert that water flow, you're going to get the same back pressure problem, and that salinity is going to increase. If you look at the history of the Delta, and I have a really nice volume that our Chamber of Commerce has for sale for you. It's about a 400-page document that shows the entire history of Bethel Island, but goes into the history of the entire Delta in general. We used to have fresh water down by the C&H sugar plant. And water diversions, for multiple reasons, have forced the salinity of that basin to be pushed up further and further. But when that plant was built, and probably nobody in this room recognizes this, when that plant was built, they drew fresh water right out of that channel. That can no longer happen. And it'll only get worse as you divert more water, or if we lose levees and things like that, that causes those pressure flows to change. So I think this report is extremely deficient, and bringing it forward as a final draft, you're way far away from that being able to be accomplished. As far as recreation goes, speaking to the gentleman there, I think you can look at, yes, there hasn't been a lot of development. Most of that development is based upon restrictions imposed by state, federal, and locals. But if you look at Andros Island, there's a marina called Willowburn. This is one of the newer marinas built in the Delta, and it's a fine example of what some of our existing marinas could be upgraded to, and what some new development could be executed in order to enhance recreational use. It takes a cooperative effort from the regulation, environmental, and the community as a whole in order to encourage that development. And I agree that it's going to be more expensive to develop there, but that expense is all related to the difficulties on getting everything approved and through the hoops. So we're imposing our own restrictions on. One of the primary goals of this commission is to encourage recreational development in the Delta, but there's nothing in here to develop any plan of action of how to get from here to there. You're just saying it'd be nice if we could expand recreational development, but the regulations in place today are so overwhelming that it is not cost effective to do that. I mean, Bethel Island's a really good example. We have a lot of marinas and such that are in a deteriorating state. But the reason they're in that state is because you can't get the capital to invest into them, because the rate of return has to be not just what the normal community would accept, but as the gentleman said, most developers want an additional cushion of 25% profit margin. So basically they need 125% profit margin to develop in the Delta, where they only need that 100% profit margin to develop somewhere else in California.
And that's because of?
Mostly regulation. It's
doesn't have anything to do with the flooding risk?
Well, the recreation and flooding risk are pretty much separate, because the recreational development is going to be water use development, and it's not going to be housing. It's going to be campgrounds, RV parks, and marinas. Those particular developments don't have a huge flood risk downside, because even if you did have a minor flood, most of the campgrounds and RV parks could get dried out and cleaned off. Most of the marinas would survive that because they're floating, and they could rise and fall with those flood waters, unless the actual problem took place right at their marina and destroyed it. If it was a marina that was on the other side of an island or in another part of the Delta and we had high waters, they survived that because they are developed for being on top of the water. So I just would really think you need to look at this a little bit closer. But my biggest objection is that, first of all, to say Bethel Island's not worthy of being a legacy community or a historically recognized community is insulting. And I've only been on the island for a little over 2 years. I've been throughout the Delta. I lived on Andros Island. I've lived at quite a few other locations. But I've driven around this island. I've read the history of the entire area. And if anybody cares to read the history, you'll find that there's more diverse examples of California's history as a whole and the Delta's history that exist on Bethel Island than exist anywhere else in those communities. Most of the other communities are either ag-driven only or some residential. Bethel Island has the history of every component of activity that's ever taken place in the Delta. There's an example of it on Bethel Island. And so to downplay its role in the significance of showing what California is and what it was and what it can be, I'm very upset that this commission is sort of really downplaying that.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Eisberg, I'm sorry that I failed to, at the beginning, kind of remind us all of the ground rules that we were operating under for this. We're trying to get through 3 chapters this morning. We've spent half our time.
There are 2 more speakers. There are 2 more